Somebody is going to ask you what's new, and you already know what you're going to say because you said it last time and the time before that. You've got a version of it now that comes out light, a small joke, a shrug, something about how things are steady. You've had that answer for a while. That's not a crisis. Now, that's what I want to be clear about before I say anything else. Nothing has collapsed. Nobody died. You're not in a hospital hallway and you're not in a courtroom. If you listed out your life on paper, a stranger would read it and think you were doing fine, and they'd be right. It's just that if you took a photograph of your life 3 years ago and one from last week, you'd have trouble telling them apart. Same job, same rooms, same weight, give or take, same conversations, same thing you've been meaning to start, same person you keep almost becoming. And there's a specific kind of tiredness that comes from that, and almost nobody has words for it because you can't complain about it. There's nothing to point at. You'd sound ungrateful. So here's what I want to do tonight. I want to walk you through 6 seasons in Scripture where absolutely nothing moved, and I want to do it in a particular order. I'm going to go by length. We'll start with 4 months and end with 40 years. And what I found when I put them in that order is that they have something in common that I have never heard anybody mention, and it changes what you should do this week. 2 things I'm holding until the end. There's a man in this message who lay in the same spot for 38 years, and when he was finally asked a direct question about whether he wanted to change, he did not say yes. He said something else, and what he said is the most honest thing in the passage, and I think a lot of us would have said the same. And at the very end, I'm going to give you a stretch of time that dwarfs every other number in this message, and it belongs to Jesus, and the fact that it belongs to him is the whole answer to this subject. Now, 3 things before I start, and they matter. First, the picture I want you to carry through all 6. When somebody breaks a bone, the treatment is a cast. And here's the strange thing about a cast. It doesn't heal anything. It has no medicine in it. All it does is hold a thing perfectly still, because that's the condition. Bone knits when it isn't being moved. And if you take the cast off early because you feel better and you go use it, you don't speed anything up, you start over. So a person in a cast experiences 6 weeks of nothing happening, and a doctor looks at the exact same 6 weeks and sees the treatment running exactly on schedule. Nobody has ever looked at a cast and concluded the treatment wasn't working. That's the picture. Hold it. Second thing, and this one is honest rather than encouraging. I am not going to promise you that your still season is about to end. 2 of the 6 numbers in this message are 38 and 40 years, and the people inside them did not know how long they were going to be there. I don't know when yours breaks. Nobody who tells you they do is telling you the truth, and I'd rather you trust me for the next 40 minutes than feel good for 9. And third, this one is important, so I'm going to say it plainly. Nothing is moving in my life is also a sentence that describes something clinical. If what you're feeling is not just circumstantial but interior, if the flatness is in you and not only in your calendar, if you've stopped wanting things you used to want, if getting up has become an effort you have to talk yourself into, if this has been running for months, that may not be a season. That may be something a doctor can actually help with, and I want you to go find out. That is not a failure of faith. God made your body and your brain, and he made people who spend their lives studying how those work, and using them is not a smaller kind of trust. It's a wiser one. Please go. All right. 6 still seasons, shortest to longest. The first one is 4 months. Nehemiah, chapter 1. And this is the shortest wait in the message, which is exactly why I want to start here, because 4 months is the one you can actually feel the shape of. Nehemiah is in the Persian capital, working as a cupbearer to the king, and his brother comes back from Judah and tells him the wall of Jerusalem is broken down and the gates are burned. And Nehemiah says he sat down and wept and mourned for days, and fasted and prayed. Now, that's the famous part. Here's the part that almost nobody notices, and it's a date. Chapter 1 tells us this happened in the month of Chislev, and chapter 2, when he finally speaks to the king, tells us it was the month of Nisan. That's about 4 months apart. 4 months between the burden arriving and one word being said about it. And you have to understand what he was doing during those 4 months. He was pouring wine. He was doing the job. Every single day, he got dressed, went into a palace, and served drinks to a foreign king while carrying something that was breaking his heart, and he did not bring it up. Not because he was afraid. Read chapter 2. When the moment comes, he moves fast and he moves with a plan. He knew what he was going to ask for and he had the details ready. He was waiting for the king to notice. And that's exactly what happens. The king looks at him and says, "Why is your face sad, since you're not sick?" This must be sadness of the heart. The door opened when somebody else opened it. Now let me say what that means for you, because 4 months is short enough that most of us have lived it. There is a category of waiting where you already know what the assignment is. You've already prayed about it. You've already built the plan in your head, and there is no move available. Not because you're passive, because the thing that has to happen next is somebody else noticing, or a door opening, or a phone ringing, and none of those are on your side of the wall. Here's the law. The first still season is the one where you have the plan and not the platform, and the only work available to you is the job you already had. And notice what that requires of a person, because it's harder than it sounds. 4 months of not bringing it up. 4 months of carrying something that mattered enormously into a room every day and setting it down at the door and pouring wine like a man with nothing on his mind. You know this if you've ever had news you couldn't share yet. A diagnosis before you told anybody. An application in. A decision you'd made but hadn't announced. You go to work and you're perfectly functional and there is an entire second conversation running underneath the first one all day. That's 4 months of Nehemiah's life, and the Bible summarizes it in a date change between 2 chapters. The second one is about 15 years. 1 Samuel chapter 16. Samuel comes to Bethlehem with oil in a horn, and he goes through 7 sons, and none of them is it. And he asks whether there are any more. And Jesse says, "There's the youngest, but he's out with the sheep." They send for him. Samuel anoints him in front of his brothers, and the text says the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon David from that day forward. That's a summit moment. That's the biggest day of that young man's life. Now read what happens a few verses later, when Saul needs a musician, and somebody suggests David. Saul sends a message to Jesse and says, "Send me David your son, who is with the sheep." Who is with the sheep? He went back. The oil was still in his hair, more or less, and the assignment was still the assignment. Go watch the animals. And depending on how you count, it's somewhere in the range of 15 years between that horn of oil and David actually sitting on a throne. 15 years of caves and a spear at his head and pretending to be insane in front of a foreign king and living among his enemies. Here's what I want you to sit with. The anointing did not change his job description. It changed his identity. It changed what was true about him in God's economy. And it did not move one single item on his weekly schedule for a very long time. And I think this is where a lot of people get wrecked, because we have been taught to expect that a genuine encounter with God produces a visible change in circumstance, quickly. And when the encounter is real and the circumstance doesn't move, people conclude they imagined the encounter. He didn't imagine it. He just went back to the sheep. And I think the modern version of that is one of the loneliest experiences in the Christian life. Something genuinely happens to you. A conference, a night of prayer you'll never forget, a passage that went off in your chest like something detonating. And for about 9 days you are a different person. And then it's a Tuesday, and you're in the same seat at the same desk answering the same category of email you were answering before it happened. And there's no one you can say that to, because saying it out loud sounds like you're complaining that God didn't rearrange your calendar. So you file it, and 2 years later you're not sure whether it was real. It was real. It just wasn't a transfer notice. Here's the law. The second still season is the one where something real happened to you, and nothing visible happened around you, and both of those can be true at once. The third one is 18 years, Luke chapter 13. This one is physical, which makes it the easiest to feel. There's a woman in a synagogue who has been bent over for 18 years. Luke says she could not fully straighten herself. Think about what that means about her daily life. For 18 years, her field of vision was the ground. She saw feet. She saw the lower half of doorways. To look someone in the face, she would have had to turn her whole body and crane, and that would have hurt, so mostly she wouldn't have. 18 years of not being able to look up. And here is the detail that matters most. She was in the synagogue, on the Sabbath, where she presumably went most Sabbaths for 18 years, bent double, into a room where she couldn't see anybody's face, to worship a God who had not fixed it. Nobody made her go. There is no indication anybody was helping her get there. And Jesus sees her. And notice, the text says he saw her and called her over. She didn't ask. She hadn't come with a request. As far as the text tells us, she came to worship, the way she had for 18 years, and that was all. And he calls her a daughter of Abraham, in public, in front of a room full of people who had been stepping around her for years. And then something happens that I want you to have, because it tells you what her 18 years had actually been like. The man in charge of that synagogue objects, out loud. He's indignant that this happened on a Sabbath, and he tells the crowd there are 6 other days for this kind of thing. So this woman finally straightens up for the first time in 18 years, in a room she'd been coming to bent double, and the first response from the leadership is a scheduling complaint. And Jesus turns on him with an argument I find almost funny in its precision. He says, "Doesn't every one of you untie your ox or your donkey on the Sabbath and lead it out to water?" Everybody in that room did. It was routine. You untie an animal on the Sabbath because an animal shouldn't go a day without water, and nobody considered that work. And then he says, "Ought not this woman, a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan has bound for 18 years, be loosed from this bond on the Sabbath day?" Loosed. The same word you'd use for the rope on the ox. He's saying you untie livestock without a second thought, and you're going to argue about a woman. Here's the law. The third still season is the one where you keep showing up to the same room with the same problem, and the showing up is the only part that's yours. Take a breath with me. All the way in and out slower than you think you need to. That's 3. 4 months of pouring wine. 15 years back with the sheep. 18 years of looking at the floor. Let's pray one line before the rest, and if you're driving, keep your eyes open. Lord, I have been reading stillness as absence. Correct that in me, even if you correct it without changing anything. And if this is landing, leave 4 words in the comments, not for me. For you, and for whoever scrolls down next and needs to see somebody say it first. Family is like an ocean, vast and full of love. You'll know exactly why those words before we're through. The 4th one is 38 years, and it's the one I told you about, John chapter 5. There's a pool in Jerusalem with covered colonnades around it, and a crowd of sick people lying there, blind, lame, paralyzed. And John singles out one man. He says one man was there who had been an invalid for 38 years. 38. That is longer than most people hold a job. That is long enough that everyone who was lying beside him when he arrived is dead or gone, and he has watched an entire population of that porch turn over around him. And Jesus comes and stands in front of him and asks him a question that seems, at first, almost insulting. Do you want to be healed? Now, that's a strange thing to ask a man who has been lying by a healing pool for 38 years. Obviously he does. That's why he's there. Except watch what he says back, because he does not say yes. He says, "Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up, and while I am going another steps down before me." Read that again, because that is one of the most human sentences in the New Testament. He was asked whether he wanted it, and what came out was an explanation of the system. He didn't say yes. He didn't say no. He described, with total accuracy, the mechanism that had been defeating him for 38 years. He knew exactly how it worked. He could tell you the whole thing, the timing, the water, the crowd, the fact that he had nobody. And I want to be very careful here, because there is a cruel version of this passage, and I've heard it preached. The cruel version says, see, he was making excuses. He didn't really want it. He'd gotten comfortable being a victim. That is not in the text, and I'm not going to say it. His explanation was true. He genuinely had no one. Somebody genuinely did get there first, every time for 38 years. He was not lying, and Jesus never once corrects him. But I do want you to notice something about what long stillness does to a person, and I notice it in myself, so I'm not standing above him. When a thing has been stuck long enough, you stop having a hope and start having an analysis. You become the world's leading expert on why it hasn't worked. You could give a lecture. You have the whole diagnosis, the timing, the market, the people, the thing about yourself you've decided is the disqualifier. And it's all accurate. That's the trap. None of it is a lie. And if somebody asks you tomorrow whether you want it, what will come out of your mouth first is not going to be yes. It's going to be the analysis, because the analysis is what you've had instead of movement for years. I'll tell you my own version, because it would be dishonest to describe this from outside it. There was a thing I wanted to do for about 6 years, and I could explain to you in considerable detail why it hadn't happened. I had reasons, good ones. Timing, finances, a season with small children, a couple of doors that genuinely did close in my face and were not my fault. And every one of those was true. And I want you to hear what happened to me over those 6 years, because it's subtle. In year 1, I had a hope and an obstacle. By year 5, I had an obstacle and a very well-rehearsed paragraph about it. The hope had quietly stopped being the main thing I was carrying. The paragraph was, somebody would ask and I'd hear myself deliver it smoothly, the way you deliver something you've said 40 times. And I'd feel a small, private wrongness afterward that I never examined. That's what 38 years does to a man on a porch. And 6 was enough to show me the mechanism. Jesus doesn't argue with it. He doesn't tell the man his attitude is the problem. He just says, get up, take your mat, and walk. Here's the law. The 4th still season is the one where you've become an expert on your own obstacle, and being right about it has not moved you 1 inch. The 5th one is also 38 years, and it's a whole nation, and it contains the single most on-the-nose verse in the Bible for this subject, Deuteronomy chapter 2. Israel is in the wilderness. And most people assume the 40 years were a 40-year journey, that they were traveling the whole time, making slow progress toward the land. They weren't. They made the trip. They got to the edge. And at Kadesh Barnea, they refused to go in. And after that, the text tells us they spent 38 years going around. Not forward, around. Deuteronomy says they circled Mount Seir for many days. Circled, that's the word. Same terrain, same rocks. Same mountain on their left, then behind them, then on their left again. A generation was born, grew up, and had children inside a loop. And then God speaks, and here is the verse. He says, you have gone around this mountain long enough. Turn northward, long enough. Now, I want to be careful with this one in a specific way, because it cuts both directions, and I'm not going to pretend it only cuts the comfortable one. Everything else in this message is about waiting well. This verse is God telling somebody to stop waiting and move, and I cannot tell you which one you're in. I don't know whether your still season is a cast that needs 6 more weeks or a mountain you've been circling and it's time to turn north. It's not something I can diagnose through a screen, and anybody who tells you they can is guessing with confidence. What I can tell you is that both are in this book. God tells people to wait, and God tells people that the waiting is over and the direction is north, and He is the one who says which. And He says it clearly when He says it. And I'll give you the one distinction I've found useful, and I offer it as a hunch rather than a doctrine. Look at the 2 words. A cast holds you still while something you cannot do yourself is being done. A loop takes you past the same landmarks. So the question isn't how long has it been, it's, am I passing the same scenery? A cast has one location. A loop has a route, and you know the route, and you could name the points on it. The same argument every 4 months, the same resolution every January, the same conversation with the same person that ends the same way and then starts again. If you can name the route, that's worth praying about differently than if you simply can't get up. Here's the law. The 5th still season is the one where the stillness has become a loop, and the instruction is not, be patient. It's turn. The 6th one is 40 years, and it's the longest, and I want to show you how it ended. Moses kills an Egyptian, and it comes out, and he runs. Exodus chapter 2. He crosses into Midian, marries a shepherd's daughter, and starts working for his father-in-law. And Stephen tells us in the book of Acts exactly how long that lasted, 40 years. Let me make that concrete. He was raised in Pharaoh's household, educated, positioned, connected to the most powerful court in the world. And then he spent 4 decades in a desert tending animals that belonged to somebody else. Not his own flock. His father-in-law's flock. 40 years of a job with no advancement, in a country that wasn't his, for a family he married into, after a life that was supposed to be enormous. By the time God speaks to him, he is 80 years old. And I want you to think about what 40 years does to a man's sense of himself, because this is the part the story doesn't spell out, and I think it's underneath everything. At 40, Moses still thought he was somebody. Read chapter 2. He goes out to his people. He intervenes. He acts like a man who believes he has standing. And when it goes wrong and he runs, he loses all of it in about a week. And then 4 decades pass. By 80, whatever he had believed about his own significance at 40 has had 40 years to go quiet. He has a wife, sons, a father-in-law, a flock, and a routine. He is a shepherd in Midian. That is not a cover story he's maintaining. By that point, it's just what he is. Which is why, when God finally speaks, the man argues. He doesn't square his shoulders and say finally. He says, "Who am I?" And he says, "They won't believe me." And he says, "I'm not eloquent." And finally, he just says, "Please send somebody else." 40 years of nothing will do that. It doesn't make you rebellious. It makes you smaller in your own estimation than you were before it started. Now here is the detail I want you to have, and it is the hinge of this entire message. Read the first verse of Exodus chapter 3. It says, "Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law, and he led the flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God." He was at work. That's it. That's what he was doing on the day the bush caught fire. He was doing the same thing he had done thousands of times. He made a routing decision, took the flock west, the way you do, and walked into the biggest moment in the history of that nation. There is no indication he was seeking anything. He wasn't fasting. He wasn't on a retreat. He hadn't just had a breakthrough in prayer. He was moving sheep. Here's the law. The sixth still season ended on a work day, at work, doing the thing he had been doing on all the days when nothing happened. Now let me show you what I found when I put all 6 in a row, because it took me by surprise. Go back and look at what each of these people was doing on the day it broke. Nehemiah was serving wine. That was his job. He was at the table doing the thing he did every day, and the king looked at his face. David was with the sheep when the messenger came for him. Twice, actually, once for the anointing and once for the palace. The bent woman was in the synagogue on a Sabbath, which is where she had been on hundreds of Sabbaths before that one. The man at the pool was lying in the same spot he had occupied for 38 years. He had not moved. He had not tried something new. And Moses was walking a flock west. Not one of them was doing anything special. Not one of them had just come off a breakthrough. Nobody was on a mountain. Nobody was in a season of unusual devotion. Nobody had finally figured out the missing piece. Every single one of them was doing an ordinary thing on an ordinary day, in the middle of the exact routine that had produced nothing for years. That's the pattern. And here's why it matters more than anything else I've said tonight. Because when nothing is moving, the instinct is to change the method. Try harder. Pray differently. Move cities. Start something. Do the thing you haven't done, on the theory that the thing you've been doing clearly isn't working. And I'm not going to tell you never to do that. Deuteronomy 2 exists. And sometimes the answer is turn north. But look at the actual data in these 6 stories. 5 out of 6, the thing that ran out was the season, not the person's strategy. And in all 6, the moment landed on somebody who was still doing the ordinary thing. Here's the first law of the turn. Every one of these ended on a workday, and not one of them ended on a mountaintop. And I want to draw out what that actually means practically, because it cuts against most of what gets preached about breakthrough. It means the thing you're doing right now, that feels like the least spiritual part of your week, is statistically the location. Not the conference, not the retreat. Not the night you finally get serious. The shift, the commute, the school run. The room you are tired of. Which is either the most boring thing I've said tonight or the most useful, and I think it depends entirely on how long you've been waiting for something to feel special before you'd count it. And now let me give you the number I've been holding. There is a stretch of time that makes every figure in this message look short, and it belongs to Jesus. Luke tells us that when he began his ministry, he was about 30 years of age. 30 years. Now think about what we actually have from those 30 years. We have the birth. We have a handful of events in the first 2 years. Shepherds, a temple visit, some travelers from the east, a flight into Egypt, and then we have exactly one incident. 12-year-old in the temple asking questions. And then 18 more years, summarized by Luke in a single sentence, that Jesus increased in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and man. 18 years. One sentence. He grew. That's it. That's the record. So roughly 90% of the earthly life of the Son of God is unrecorded, and by every visible measure it was uneventful. He was in a workshop. Mark tells us the town called him the carpenter. He had a trade and he worked it. In a town so unremarkable that when somebody told Nathanael the Messiah was from Nazareth, Nathanael's actual response was a question about whether anything good could come from there. He was 30 years old before anything the world would call happening happened. Now hold that against the sentence in the title of this message. If nothing moving meant God had stopped, then God stopped for 30 years inside his own son. Read that again. He didn't. Obviously he didn't. Something was going on in Nazareth for 3 decades that the 4 gospel writers didn't consider necessary to describe, and every bit of it was load-bearing for what came after. From the outside, from the street, from the point of view of a neighbor in that town, it looked like a man in his 20s still doing his father's job in a village nobody respected. Here's the master law, and if you take one sentence out of tonight, take this one. Stillness has never once been evidence of absence. It was the condition of the most important life ever lived, for 30 out of 33 years. Take a breath. All the way down. Now let me put this in your hands, and I want to do it carefully. Which of the 6 is yours? Is it 4 months, you know the assignment, you've got the plan, and the only thing missing is somebody else opening a door you can't reach? Is it 15 years, something real happened to you and your calendar never got the message? Is it 18, the same room, the same problem, and the only part that's yours is that you keep going? Is it 38 at the pool, where you have become the world's expert on why it hasn't worked and being right hasn't moved you? Is it 38 in the loop, where the honest answer might be that it's time to turn north? Or is it 40, long enough that the person you were supposed to become has started to feel like somebody you used to hear about? Don't type it, don't tell me. Tell him, because he's the only one who can see the difference between a cast and a loop, and he's not annoyed that you can't. And 3 things before I let you go. Do not measure God's activity by your calendar. Those two have never been on the same instrument. Do not despise the ordinary thing you're doing. It is statistically where this ends. Moses was moving sheep. And do not stay in a loop out of a misplaced idea of patience. If God has said turn north, waiting is not faithfulness, it's just the shape you've gotten used to. You don't know which one you're in, ask him, and ask somebody who knows you. Now here's the grace, and then I'm done. I want to go back to Nazareth one more time. There's something about those 30 years that I think is the tenderest thing in this whole message, and it's this. Jesus didn't skip it. He could have. If there was ever a life that had a reason to fast forward through the unremarkable part, it was that one. There was a fixed amount of time available, there was an enormous amount to do, and he spent 30 years of it in a workshop in a village. Which means that when you tell him about your still season, you are not describing something to him that he has only observed. He knows what it is to be a grown man in a small town where everyone knows your father's trade. He knows what an ordinary Tuesday feels like when you are aware of something enormous and nobody around you is. He knows what it is to have a calling and a workbench at the same time. And here's what makes me able to preach this at all. He didn't call those years wasted. He never once refers to them as the waiting part. There is no passage where he describes his 30s as the time his real life started. Whatever those years were, they were not the prologue. They were part of it. And there's one more thing about Nazareth I can't get past. When he finally did start, and went home, and stood up to read in his own synagogue, the people who had watched him for 30 years didn't believe him. Mark says they asked, "Isn't this the carpenter? Aren't his brothers and sisters right here with us?" They had 30 years of data on him, and their conclusion was, "We know this guy." So the 30 years didn't even buy him a hearing in his own town. Whatever was being built in Nazareth, it was not a local reputation. Which tells you what those years were actually for. They were not preparation in the sense of positioning. Nobody was being convinced. Nothing was accumulating that anybody could see. And so is this. Whatever these years have been for you, the ones you'd skip if you were telling somebody the story of your life, they are not the part before your life. They are your life, and he has been in this kind of year, personally, for longer than most of us will ever have to. Let's pray, and then I'll let you go. Father, nothing is moving, and I'm tired in a way I can't explain to anybody, because there's nothing to point at. I'm not going to pretend I understand the timing, but I'd like to stop reading stillness as your absence, because you spent 30 years in a village and nobody wrote a word about most of it. Meet me at work. Meet me in the ordinary thing, because that's where you've met almost everybody. And if I've been going around the same mountain and it's time to turn, say so plainly and I'll go. Here's your one thing this week, and it's smaller than you'd expect. Write down the ordinary thing, the unglamorous, repetitive, mostly unwitnessed thing you do, the job, the school run, the caregiving, the shift, the same room on the same morning. Write down the actual sentence. This is what I do, and then do it this week as the place you expect to be met. Not to make something happen. You can't make it happen, and neither could anybody in this message. Because in 5 out of 6 of these stories, the ordinary thing is exactly where the person was standing when the season ended. Moses made a routing decision with a flock. That's all he did that day. And one thing I'll ask, as ministry, somebody you know is in year 6 or year 9 of nothing, and nobody has checked on them, because people only check on you when something's wrong. Their life looks fine. Send this to them. Don't write a paragraph, just send it. And leave 4 words in the comments, for you and for the next person who scrolls past and needs to see somebody go first. 30 years in Nazareth. Because that's the number. 30 years of a life we have almost no record of, in a town people made jokes about, spent by the only person who has ever had less time to waste than you do. He wasn't stopped. Neither are you. God bless you, my brother, my sister. Until next time.